We often don't meet people where they're at. We say, you need to get all the way over here. And if they're too far away, that's your you problem. They don't know you. They may be some of your best friends. They don't know what's going on with you. They think they know you, but you know they don't. Are those authentic emotions who you are? If that is who you are, you deserve to be with someone who loves, appreciates who you are. If they don't find something that is authentically you attractive, save your time. Move on. You have a lot of unearned privilege like me. You cannot lean out white people. You cannot. You gotta have the conversation. Because of the way I think about it, if it's not you, then who?
Welcome back, everyone, to Diary of an Empath. Today, we're diving deep into the world of mental health, personal growth, and emotional resilience with my second two-time reigning champ on the show, Dr. Justin Puder. He's a licensed psychologist, a mental health advocate, and social media powerhouse who's helping thousands break free from anxiety, self-doubt, and the pressure to have it all figured out. And he's got a unique blend with his insights. And if you guys go on his page, you'll see he makes it fun. You are the only person to ads I will watch when you do an ad for anything. I watch all of it. You're the only one. Welcome back to the show.
Yo, thanks so much for having me. That means a lot.
I'm not kidding. Like, you're the only person that I follow on Instagram who, if you do an ad, I will legitly sit through the whole thing because you're funny.
I appreciate that so much because I put so much effort into it. Because I know we all swipe by right away. And I'm like, how can this be somewhat interesting at all?
Yeah. Well, I feel like for you, that just kind of goes into who your character is and who you are, even as a therapist. So for those that don't know you, how do you define your mission and who do you define yourself as?
Yeah, great question. At the core, I'm always just trying to reduce stigma surrounding mental health. Like, that was my goal from the beginning when it was just my mom commenting on every video, like, great job, Juddy. And like, never ever thought I would like get to the point of having such a big audience. But I think it's really important. And now it's like the growth I've seen from 2019 till now, the amount of voices who have expertise, a lot of mental health professionals, it's amazing. Because especially now more than ever, we need people who have advanced degrees, are experts who can help people out, especially in a time where a lot of people, again, there's a lot of need out there, especially in the United States, and people are limited on resources. So I think that's important. I just try to model like being a real person who doesn't have it all figured out. Like, it doesn't matter how much education you got, how much schooling you got. We're all on this journey and things are constantly changing. So it's cool to have the privilege to get the educations that we get. But at the same time, it's like we're always adapting and things are happening politically in our environment that we need the community. We need to be able to talk it out. And us as mental health professionals, we don't have it all figured out. So I don't know. I try to show up and be real, provide some psycho ed, but I'm on this journey like anyone else.
Yeah, for 100%. I agree with that because there is authenticity. I think that's so important when you are in these positions of wanting to help people and are helping people because it makes the experience human, right? Like, I think we have this myth of therapy of like, I'm going to sit and lay on a couch and my therapist is going to psychoanalyze me with a pen and a piece of paper. And listen, no shade to anyone that does that. But I think there's something about sitting with somebody in their space of where they're at and just being human that can be so powerful in the healing process. I'm curious for you, when you think of myths of therapy, what do you think are some really basic common misconceptions that people have when they're very hesitant to go down the therapy road?
Yeah, that's such a good question. I think you're hitting up upon one, and that's that us as therapists or mental health professionals, that we think we have all the answers for you. And on the one hand, I know you're rolling up, you want to feel better, you want to get change in this area. But the truth is, there's so much individual difference. Like any new client I pick up, I have no idea in your unique journey what's going to be the most helpful. And to me, that's the coolest part about the work is there's sort of this like figuring it out. Like I always say, I'm trying to look through the lens of the client that's right in front of me. And that to me fosters this curiosity of knowing that your cultural background, your narrative, the things you've experienced. I think sometimes it can feel like therapy is like, you're going to walk in, I'm going to tell you to do some mindfulness and, you'll be gone, which I love mindfulness. Don't get me on that train. We love mindfulness around here. But there's so much nuance and individual difference that goes into it, which is why we know the relationship you form, the back and forth you form and understanding between you and your therapist is the biggest predictor of outcome. It's not the expertise.
Yeah, I think that you hit the nail on the head with that. It's really the relationship that can make a big difference too. And I know for me, before I became a therapist, I really didn't have an understanding of what therapy was. I grew up in a household and I guess cultural norms. And I didn't even know what that word meant. Like, I remember when I was 15, I was just going through some really crazy shit as a teenager. And I ended up I guess I was Baker acted. I was like in this facility for a 48-hour hold. And I remember being this teenager who really just like was trying to figure out my self identity. And I'm like, what the fuck is this place? This is scary. And then after that, I'm like, I never want to do anything mental health again, because that was my first like story with it. And the first time I actually sat down with a therapist, I remember being so guarded and so protective. And now that I look back at it, I'm like, oh my God, I had it so wrong so many times. So for somebody who's like, okay, I'm ready to kind of take that first step, what would you suggest for them, for somebody who's really hesitant to start changing that narrative to allow that healing to happen? Because sometimes people come into therapy, or maybe like they're coming into couples therapy, or they're going into something that they didn't want to go to, and they're guarded and they can't make progress. So where does that willingness, where does it start?
Yeah, that's another great question. And thanks for sharing that, because I think your truth parallels a lot of other people that are out there, meaning that their first therapeutic experience is more of like a hold and an evaluation, which isn't the nuance and sort of the in-depth that you get in sort of the back and forth psychotherapy with the same person. Again, we could go in depth of why, these things happen and why we have Baker Acts in general, but they're often not therapeutic experiences that anybody likes. It's more of like a necessity in certain circumstances, just to pin that. But yeah, I think this isn't self-promotion, I swear, but I think this is one of the biggest upsides of following mental health professionals on social media. Because before, it's like, if you're trying to get any idea of what therapy was like you get maybe a one-pager on psychologytoday.com. Like you get like a little small picture in the corner and a few seemingly robotic written paragraphs about, I enjoy the therapeutic process. And again, those things can be helpful. But if you get to see or have the option to see 100 videos of somebody talking passionately about things that matter, like anxiety, depression, or just how we get through this life, I think you get a really good feel for how somebody is. Again, does that completely simulate therapy and vulnerability? No, but it allows you to see, hey, this is a human that maybe I could feel comfortable talking with. Because I think when you can't even picture who I'm talking to, it's like almost into the void. It almost feels even more lonely. Like I don't even know who you are, except this little photo that I saw on Psych Today.
Well, that's like the kind of the irony of social media, right? It's got pros and cons. On the other side of things, we are now becoming very disconnected, right? Because we have so much technology and human interaction. I mean, shit, I do telehealth, like, and I love it, don't get me wrong. But that human connection, I think, has gone down. How do you think that's affecting us? Is it helping us, or is it hurting us?
I know you're right, and you're nailing that on the head as well. Of like, it does have pros and cons, and I think, which is why sometimes when I see people taking stances really far in one direction, it feels, again, it feels like not the reality that we bathe in. Meaning, we can hop on, and I'm sure you've had these experiences where I have a nice scroll, like I learned something. Maybe I saw a nice motivational quote or post. I follow a lot of science and sort of mental health things,
Yeah,
so I'm like
same.
learning and growing. And sometimes you do have a nice scroll. And I'm like, dang, that felt good. How often is that the case? Especially when you're being inundated with the world's pain at any moment, which is what I talk about a lot of like, I don't think we've evolved at any moment to see all the trauma that's happening all around the world within like a 30-minute scroll, seeing like, 30 different things. And there's this fine line between you don't want to be ignorant. You want to be in the know. You don't want to run away from the things and the pain. And at the same time, we have to be regulated enough, grounded enough to be able to be an advocate, make a difference, and take care of ourselves. It's a lot of ask when, again, in 30 minutes, you're seeing 30 different traumas that just happened.
So this is where I struggle because as a therapist, also as somebody who has Palestinian background, um, living in the US, all the shit that's happening, on one hand, I'm like, okay, I need to be involved. I have to use my page for good. I have a platform. It's my responsibility. That's how I feel personally. And I'm very empathic. And so I have a hard time drawing that line. How do you do that? Because I know that I've seen your platform. I know you speak up for things. Um, where do you draw that line, and how do you keep yourself grounded of like doing exactly what you said? How do you keep those boundaries? Because I know I struggle.
It is hard, exactly like you said, because, and I think the thing you experience the most is when you talk about things that are hot topics, the door is open. You get a lot of personal attack. I don't need to tell you this, but you get a lot of personal attack. And it's not just people sort of debating with you, but you can get a lot of hate. You can get the death threats. These things happen. And it's weird to think, because where I started of being like, I just want to inform people about mental health, be vulnerable, show that there's sort of a better way forward. But that is political, right? Politics are always going to be involved with our environment and our mental health. Like, you can't separate the two. And so if I'm just being transparent, I don't think I have that figured out. I think if I've learned anything from it is, for some people, you're not going to be enough. And for other people, you're going to be too much. You have to be okay with whatever it is you do. And for me, it's like, yeah, I'll comment and make some political posts. And then after 3 or 4 days, I'm like, I can get a little exhausted and I can get run down. And I can be like, okay, like, what am I needing in this moment? And then I'll make some mental health posts, go back to sort of like the big content that I tend to make on my platform. And then something will happen in the news and I'll be like, oh, hell no. And I'll be like, commenting on this. If anything, if I'm being totally transparent, it's given me so much love and appreciation for people who on the daily, their job is either to cover the news or comment on politics,
Oh
because it
yeah.
is relentless.
Yes. It's like collective trauma, right? We question like, okay, well, how can we know about like epigenetics? Well, so if you guys don't know, you gotta know. We'll talk about that in a little bit, but collective trauma, I think, is something that's very real. Like, we're exposing ourselves, like you said, on this really big platform of constantly exposing ourselves to these micro stressors. I want to go back to what you said, where I think I don't know if I'm going to quote you correctly, but therapists do have this responsibility for politics. Therapy is politics. Why?
Because it impacts everything. I think that's the thing that would be ludicrous to say, of like, whether you're talking about oppression, whether you're talking about resources, or just, yeah, access to knowledge and information. Politics impact that greatly. And it could be at the local level. We can talk about the national level and all the way up to the Supreme Court. But it all impacts and matters of who gets access, who has the financial resources to even access and get adequate care. But these things matter. And again, you can go into great detail of all the things happening right now, and questioning psychotropic medication, which again is a wild assertion to make on its own. But it is and always will be political. And again, to pretend it doesn't exist is just an exercise in privilege.
I agree. It's political, and I think that it affects all of us. And to say that, well, it doesn't affect me, so why does it matter? That is literally privilege, right? To ignore something just because it doesn't affect you, because I can guarantee you that in some way, whether it's you, your wife, your daughter, your uncle, your friend, somebody is impacted in some way. Always. You can't oppress the oppressed, right? And I think that we're living in this day and age where people are like, stick to what you know, stick to, what you're good at, mental health. And it's like, hello, how do you think people are being impacted? I mean, you have this minority here, you have women, you have people of color, you have the trans community. I mean, everybody's being affected in such a big way. When you define collective trauma, I'm curious for you, how would you explain that? And how is it impacting us from a collective perspective?
Yeah, the way I think about it is it's a stressor that we all experience. And a lot of times you can feel upended by it. You can feel like you can't make sense by it, but it plagues your mind just like any trauma would. And then of course, it can change your whole outlook of how you go forward. I mean, we literally got told by this administration that trans people don't exist. And again, it doesn't take that much empathy to pause and think, if my government told me I don't exist, how would that impact my day-to-day life? And I know, and I've talked about this on my own channel of like, I understand there's a portion of the population that doesn't personally know anyone who's trans. Like I can have some empathy for that you don't personally know. But then it's like to hold the question of like, but what if someone told you and your reality and all the things you feel don't exist? Your government told you that. I don't think people can comprehend the level of pain that comes with that.
Yeah, it's the gaslighting and what we call traumatic invalidation, right? What's interesting too is, even though we can't say, okay, you have PTSD unless you've had like some kind of traumatic experience where there was threat to life or perceived threat to life, right? But if you are invalidated enough in your life, I'm not talking about like criticism or like just the basic stuff that we're going to experience, but traumatic invalidation to where it is traumatic in nature, that can actually look like PTSD symptoms, right? That includes your government, your family, your community. And I think that it's so difficult when we're living in this age of so much racism and homophobia and transphobia. My question to you is, when we are now seeing our family and our friends that are coming out, and it's like, whoa, I did not know that this was this person's belief system. How do we navigate when it's people we know?
Yeah, and this is where I feel, strongly about this. You got to lean in. And especially if you come from any, you look like me, you have a lot of unearned privilege like me. You cannot lean out white people. You cannot. You got to have the conversation. Because the way I think about it, if it's not you, then who? And it's uncomfortable. Like I can, I feel that deep inside with a large portion of my family and people I know closely. It's uncomfortable. But if anybody is going to have nuanced, hard conversations with people who might be ignorant, if we're putting it at best, if we put it at best, maybe they're ignorant, maybe they're lacking some information and knowledge. For me, having a lot of trans clients, I can hear the ignorance, smell the ignorance right away. And that's where I try to inform people. But if it's not you, then who? And again, do I understand? And I'm not telling every person in every scenario, like no matter what, you better lean in with your uncle and, get in heated, arguments. No, I'm not saying that for everyone. But do I feel strongly with people like myself who have a lot of unearned privilege that if it's not us, then who? Yeah, I do feel that way. And I think, especially if you have a personal relation, like, I don't think much in terms of like, if someone has an opposing view on the internet, I think it's hard. I think when you jump in the comments against someone who's just launching hate and bigotry and racism, it's not to say you shouldn't combat that, because I think that can be good modeling. Do I think you're going to change their mind in the comment section on Instagram? Probably not. Probably not. But with your uncle, when you're there and you've known him your entire life, oh, I think you can have some meaningful conversations. And I think in this era, I think you got to go. You got to lean in and have them.
That's so hard. Like leaning in and having these uncomfortable conversations, especially if we're in a dynamic where we're kind of used to avoiding them or avoiding conflict or avoiding the big things that like, oop, I might get rejected or I don't want to have an argument. Let's just talk about it. For people who have this tendency to kind of lean out of things that feel uncomfortable, whether it's big conversations like that or whether it's so simple as holding a boundary, how does somebody start to get out of that dynamic of avoidance versus leaning into things? And I'm not talking about when things are like, abusive in nature. I'm talking about when things are, you're holding resentment. It's not serving you to avoid, and you're just not having these tough conversations. Where does someone start with that?
I think, especially if you're in the midst of curiosity, will lead you far. Meaning, like, if you're hearing something that sounds like transphobic, racist, whatever, oh, tell me more about that. Tell me more of what you think about that. Yeah, where does that come from for you? Like, do you know? Did you hear that from a Mexican person? Is that something you've heard and experienced when interacting with trans people before? But in just leaning forward with open-ended questions and curiosity, you can start to hold up a mirror for some people. I think the thing that usually, and this is my method, you can take it for what it's worth. When you lead with some curiosity and openness, it invites information to flow in. And especially when someone can say, like, you know what, I've never talked to a trans person about that. No, I've never had that conversation. You'd be like, oh yeah, I happen to work with a lot of trans individuals, and you know what, I haven't heard what you just said. That's not something I've ever heard a single one of them say, actually. So I was just curious where that might have come from for you. But this is how you can get in and especially face to face when we're talking about family and these nuanced sort of things. Asking open-ended questions, leaning with curiosity can invite the two-way street. I think when you get into name calling right away, you can forget it, And we all know the names that get called to both ways in both directions. People are just going to get defensive and they're not going to hear anything. But I think when you ask, when you're open and you have the privilege to be curious with someone else like that, I think a lot of things can shift.
I like the idea of that because it's giving you more data, right? Like the more you just kind of invite people to talk and to listen and to ramble whatever shit is spewing in their head, it gives you more information to work with. Like, do I even want to have this conversation? Are they even going to be in a place to be willing to hear a different opinion or a different outcome? Maybe it's not even worth my time. Or maybe I can lean in this way, in a way that they'll listen. I think it's very tactical, I guess it's like maybe a word, but sometimes necessary for some people, right? When it comes to like, let's shift gears. So if we're talking about relationships, like romantic relationships, and we see some people who can be like a little bit more conflict avoidant, why do you think there are some people, and I'm just curious if and on average, like when somebody is more avoidant, like avoidant attachment style, avoidant with conflict, where do you think that comes from? Because I'm curious to see why people are sometimes really avoidant, and then you have some people that really lean in because they need answers.
It's such a good question. And I'm thinking about, clients I've had privilege to work with and sort of my experience with people who do tend to be more avoidant. Some of it can be self-esteem, in their upbringing, like they were taught that their voice doesn't really matter. Maybe again, I'm thinking of a lot of like sort of classic examples of things I've seen, but in their family it was very patriarchal and the father like made all the decisions and they were just told like, your voice doesn't matter. Children should be seen, not heard. Like there's a lot of these sort of cultural variables that come up of people are used to sort of leaning out. Like they'll have sort of those core messages of my voice doesn't really matter here. People aren't going to take me seriously. When I brought things up in the past, when I was growing up, I got talked over. I think that can be the narrative for a lot of people. And it's hard. It's hard to sort of hold that, look at that, and be able to say of like, how did that impact me? How does that impact my voice? And especially if we're getting down to the brass tacks of these are things that really matter to me. And I find like are core values for me. How do I bring them back and allow myself to articulate? And what type of person do I want to be with? Meaning, do they, replay old patterns where I'm kind of used to leaning out, or do they invite me sort of into this middle space and respect and hear what I have to say?
Mm-hmm. It's funny. So when I always go back to me as an example, I tended to lean out a lot. Um, and it's not that I would consider myself before more of a fearful avoidant, somebody who would lean out when things felt too much, but lean in when I felt things kind of getting distanced away or potential that I can get rejected. And it was very confusing for me. And one thing that I tended to gravitate towards was this hyper independence and hyper productivity. Like I'm just going to do it all myself. Right. I have a very difficult time asking for help. I have a very difficult time accepting help. I'm actively working on saying, okay, like when my friend's like, can I just bring you some soup? I know you're not feeling well. I'm like, no.
I
Don't you
got this.
dare.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Right,
Don't
right.
you dare go out of your way for me. That's way too much. Instead of just giving them the gift of like letting them doing something for me. So for someone that is, let's just take me. I'm hyper independent. I'm super, super productive woman of the year, right? If that's not serving me, where do I start to lean into that process and make changes? And why does that happen? Why are we so hard-headed?
It's what we know. It's what we know. Because it's interesting. Like, it sounds like in another chapter, our behaviors would have paralleled a lot for different reasons. For me, like having my dad pass away and my brother pass away, like I kind of just, this all happened before I was 23 years old. I just kind of felt like, people die. Like this is all short lived. You can't really rely on anyone. So I would lean out for different reasons, but found myself doing the same of like, it's all on me anyways. More than half my family's passed. Like, if I'm not going to make it, like, no one's going to make it for me. But like, that's a really lonely existence and really isolating one and really stressful one. Like, I would have a lot of friends, but did I foster deeper relationships with them for exactly the types of things they're saying by actually letting them in? Hell no. Hell no. And my friends who have stuck with me that I met before grad school would say the same. They're like, dude, you couldn't be bothered. You were always doing like 100 different things through school and undergrad and even after that. But again, it can be like a really lonely existence. Exactly what you're saying is like, it's accepting it's going to feel uncomfortable. Like so much of our life is trying to do things where we either numb out and don't feel anything or try to get the dopamine hit. But when you accept the soup for the first time, there's something about it that it doesn't feel good right away. And a lot of my clients will report that. But is it trending towards sort of the life and the relationships that you actually want to have? And that's sort of the question, we ask ourselves, I ask my clients, is this towards the relation of being able to, depend on people, being able to trust people and having more of a two-way street?
Did you guys know that I'm not only a therapist, but I'm also a coach and a professional tarot reader? Now, it's not exactly me hovering over a crystal ball telling your future. It's a way to connect with your guides on life issues such as career and love and spirituality. And sometimes people need one-on-one coaching to help them through breakups, toxic relationships, healing the mother wound, their spiritual path, or navigating tools as an empath. So I do all of these things to help my clients pursue life and decisions and understand themselves. So if you are interested in one-on-one coaching or a tarot reading, click the link below to get started. Okay, back to the podcast. Okay, so let's flip the coin. Being now the person who I'm doing things for everybody, super fixer, when they never even asked me to do that. And then getting frustrated when I'm working harder than them.
Mm-hmm.
What is that? Because I'm dealing with that. I do too much. And then I'm like, okay, back it up, Carice, because they never asked you to do that to begin with. That's why you're getting frustrated. I'm working harder.
Yeah, that's good insight. Such good insight. But there's something about that sort of, if you have all the control and you're the one constantly leaning in, you're sort of controlling the anxiety. Where I think tolerating anxiety is much more living within the middle, which again, is there ever a middle? Is it always, I think it's much more of a back and forth. But when you allow of like, hey, this is what I can do for today and this is what I can't, anxiety can pop in there. Meaning like, hey, I can make it to the party, but I'm rushing from work. I'm not going to be able to, make the cake or bring those things you wanted me to bring. Like I just can't, but I'll make it. There's something about that feels anxiety provoking of like, oh no, I'm letting them down. Like they wanted me to do this and this, but like I really can't unless I cut out of work early, and that's going to only hurt me. These are the things where you slow down and you ask yourself like, what am I needing? What's actually going to be helpful for me and not self-sacrificing? Because I hear you, sometimes we can tilt too far the other way, but both are uncomfortable at first. It's uncomfortable at first to say, you know what, this is what's going to work for me. And if that doesn't feel enough for you, I can tolerate that, but I'm the only one that can take care of me and recognize what's coming up for me.
It's so weird because there are times when it's not even like the no that I'm afraid of, or the because most people are understanding. And I think even for me, like I know most people are not, I'm not going to lose this friend if I don't do the thing. But there's something in that moment that is like my default mechanism of, oh, let me Google a million things and try to fix the problem for them. And I don't know if it's because I'm in a position where I'm constantly, the social worker in me, the therapist in me, the healer in me, the double Capricorn in me, but I've had to really take a step back sometimes and ask myself like, okay, am I doing too much here? Have I built a really good relationship where I want to do all of these things? Because if I'm starting to feel resentment because I'm working harder than them, then that actually puts a damper in this potential relationship. And that's not fair to the other person because they didn't ask me to do this. So that's where I struggled. And I'm like, really, my accountability has to be in why is my self-worth tied into that?
Mm. Yeah,
It's
and
it's a
then
struggle.
yes, yes, and pausing to recognize when it's happening is like the key in the hand, right? Because who knows how long for any of our processes, how long have these been automatic for us? Is what I try to ask clients. I reflect on for myself is like, when do I first remember sort of being this way, of feeling like, well, I just have to anticipate what they're wanting and just do this, even though they're not asking, even though I might be sort of burdening myself or stressing myself out by doing so. And I'm with you. Sometimes it's the work roles, the things we get involved in like later in life, sometimes that we've just used to assuming that, like, I'm going to be the fixer here. But again, to what end? And what is the cost of that?
There's a lot of costs. Like there's a lot of pros, right? I've grown a business. I'm a single mom. I have a nice house. I've done all the things. I mean, hell, I was the one, I'm like, I'm not going into the army. I'm going to go in the Marines. I'm not going to get my bachelor's. I'm going to keep going and get my master's. I'm going to do all of these big things. I can work in a prison. I can do all of the things. And, it has helped me, but at what cost? I have a hard time letting a man be in his masculine because I'm like, I'll fix the light bulb. And it's like, no, 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 let him do it. Let him do it. And burnout. So let's talk about burnout a little bit because this is something that is a great segue into it. Because again, put myself as the example. I burn myself out. I do it to myself. What is burnout? How can it happen? And how do we start recognizing if we're in that cycle?
Yeah, burnout is a result of basically chronic stress. Sometimes it's in our control, sometimes it's not in our control. Meaning sometimes it's behavioral and interpersonal patterns that we've just gotten so accustomed to that we're just doing the most for everyone. And sometimes it's like work environment shift and we're working long hours and we again our energy isn't there. Some people can slide into depressive episodes, not always, but you can. Anxiety can certainly increase, but it's for a lot of my clients who are in burnout, it's sort of this numbness, apathy, and just fatigue and tiredness, which again, if you're keeping score at home, that checks a lot of boxes for depression. But in my mind, it's usually just before. Like I'll see a lot of people like, okay, we're experiencing some burnout here. What has led to this? How did we get here? What are the factors that are leading to us feeling like so tired, so exhausted, emotionally blunted and numb? Again, you can start to feel a bit of that apathy. It's like sort of like all the warning signs are up. Um, where it comes from each individual, though, is sort of the diversity of it. Some things are just like corporate America. Corporate America is built to burn people out. It's built to tell you if you're not doing the most, well, you're not enough. Like that's a you problem. Like if you're not working through the weekends, why do you need time to regulate? Why would you need a personal day? What's vacation for? And again, this is a very American thing. Like other cultures and countries are not all like this. Like they respect and understand that our bodies need regulation. We need to reset. And that's something I see all the time in this culture is just like the work cycle is set up to burn you out and make you feel bad.
When I started traveling, and seeing how other cultures normally would take a 2 hour lunch or a 2 hour fiesta, or like certain places were closed between 2 and 5 o'clock. We don't, I remember in Portugal, I was sitting at a table with my daughter and it was our first day. We just got there and I'm like, okay, let's go find some food. We're hungry. And so many places were closed. And so we finally find a cafe where I think we were in Lisbon. We sit down at the table and there's a sign right on the table in Portuguese that said no working between the hours of like 2 and 6 p.m., meaning no laptops no computers, nothing open at the table. I found that so fascinating that this is like a regular cafe and it's a rule that you cannot work between these hours. I'm like, I need to move to Portugal. But the quality of life and mental health is so different because the environment plays such an impactful role. How does our environment impact us? And I also want to give some listeners that like really just are in this cycle of burnout, what is something they can do starting today to get out of that cycle?
Yeah, I love that question. And also, yeah, I got to study abroad in Mexico when I was at undergrad, and the power of the siesta midday, the whole family, you're coming home for lunch, everybody. I was like, oh, maybe, a couple people. Everybody is coming home for lunch. Everybody in the whole family, we're all meeting. And then in my head, I remember asking, it was like within the first week, I was like, so what time do you work till? And they're like, oh, like 4:35. And I'm like, wait, but we're spending 2 hours eating this
Oh,
great lunch and then resting.
love that.
Everyone's going to their own little private space in the home, resting, kicking back, or having like conversations, and they still end work at the same. But it was, again, being an ignorant American, it blew my mind. I was like, no, this is literally amazing. Like I feel far better, like in this
Yeah,
system,
you're not depressed. You just need to get out of the US.
you need to sell some merch on that. That's good. That's real
That's,
good.
I mean, like, honestly, listen, I get not everybody can afford it. So I really say this in a place of privilege, but if you can afford it, I will give you a prescription. Go on a vacation, get out of the US, go work from Portugal for 2 weeks, come back and tell me how you feel.
Well,
Problem solved.
it is. It's the collecting of the different cultural experiences that it is great privilege, but it helps you understand it's not you. And that's really hard. And we talk all the time of like, it's not the fish, it's the water. And again, the best way to sort of know that is to have the privilege to fly out of the water to land in another pond and say, wow, like they're right. Like it's not. But I think really just unapologetically being able to use your time. And that's something when I've really worked with clients on sort of like not folding whatsoever, on using your time, your leave, your personal days, the PTO, whatever it is. I think systems will pressure you. And anyone, I'm sure there's people listening like nodding their heads. Systems will pressure you to be like, well, why? What's this for? What's that for? Again, legally, they can't in a lot of these instances. But do managers or certain people feel pressured maybe from above them and then they pass that on to you? Like, well, where are you going? Why are you whatever? It's like, no, use your time. Use your time that you earned to step away. I mean, that's like the number one. And so many people feel like, well, I can't, it's this season or that. But it's like, if you don't step away and take care of yourself, like, again, they're not going to. They're going to keep looking at returns and how did we do this quarter. They're not thinking, oh, is Tracy over here sliding into burnout? Unfortunately.
I'm a firm believer of, some people, listen, I know that not everybody's like this. Use your PTO. Don't let it stack up and wait. Like I get it, emergencies can happen. use the money, spend the money on the trip. Obviously you want to be responsible with certain things for emergencies, but I've seen so many people that I used to work with, in the federal system. I got like 250 hours of PTO. Why? When's the last time you actually went on vacation and did something? Oh, I don't know, 10 years ago. Like, that's insanity. To me, I like to go through the life of just doing the same thing over and over and over again. You have the good china hasn't been used in 10 years. Use the good china. You get that bottle of tequila that you've been saving from 10 years from Mexico, from, your wedding. Drink the tequila, drink the good wine, savor it now. Like, why are you waiting? Because tomorrow is not promised. Listen, I hope we all live a long life, but it's just not guaranteed. Use it.
I love it. I agree. I'm of the same philosophy. And hey, if whatever you're doing out there is working for you, of course, no shame in that. But I feel very much the same. And I think some of that, again, like when you go through grief and loss at a young age, you kind of get, I feel like I got slapped in the face with that of like, damn, we really don't know. Like I'm almost my dad's age, which is wild. I'm having a lot of crises
Oh,
around that of like my dad passed when he's 41. I turned
oh my
40 this
God.
year
He was so
and
young.
so young, so young. My brother was only 25, but like you think about that, I'm like, oh my gosh, like, and I know people who have been through grief and loss like early in life. It's similar. It's like you get the wake up call, like you're just not here that long. You're just not. And so like all these ideas of like, oh, maybe in 20 years, 30 years, it's like at some point you got to start leaning towards of like, well, what about now? Like, what am I doing for myself now? Because again, certain systems are set up for you to self-sacrifice for the next 30 years. And I don't know. I don't know, like, to your point, 30 years in the future, if you're going to be happy with that you prolong that long.
Have you ever heard of the book? I think it's like the Regrets of the Dying.
Oh, no, I haven't.
Yeah, I forgot. I hope that's the name of the book, and I'm so sorry I can't give the credit to the author. But there's a book called like The Five Regrets of the Dying or something along those lines. And one of the regrets is like, I wish I would have traveled more. I wish I would have had more experiences, and I wish I would have took more risks. And essentially, this woman, I think she was a hospice nurse, started interviewing all of these people at the end of life, and they all seem to have the same type of regrets, that I wish I would have done this, or I wish I would have done more of that. And I didn't, for many different reasons. I was stuck in a marriage that I couldn't get out of. I didn't have enough money to go. I was stuck in this 9 to 5 job that I just didn't take more time. I didn't spend enough time with my kids. And, we just don't know if we're going to be in good health. We don't know if, we're going to be in a position where we have our parents for X amount of time. When we're talking about grief, because I am thinking about you and being your dad being 41, which, Justin, I'm so sorry that he's so young to pass that soon. And then your brother, how do you deal with grief as it comes up? Because I feel like it's not just a one and done, right? It's ongoing. So for people that are going through similar things, or thinking about maybe their mom passed or their dad passed or their child passed, how do we navigate grief? How did you navigate through your grief?
Yeah, not 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 well, especially in the beginning. I feel like my go-to was avoidance. Like when my dad passed, he passed away in winter break in between semesters while I was at university. And of course I was at home and everything else. But like, he passed, his cancer got worse really quickly. He went to hospice, he was only there a day, he passed away, had the funeral, I went back. I didn't miss a day of school. And it's like I kind of didn't know what to do. And I know a lot of people, when they lose a loved one, you're like, am I supposed to not go to work? Am I supposed to not go to school now? Am I supposed to? And it's one of those things where it's like, there's no answer. No one can tell you, yes, take the semester off. No one can tell you, go, oh no, you should go back. It's something you just have to feel your way through. I think the downside of sort of rolling forward for me is like, I just suppress the shit out of everything. Like just for semesters on end. And I was so irritable. Like anything would happen so small and it would just be like a volcano inside. And now looking back, it's like so obvious. It's like, dude, you were so sad. But again, the way men especially can get socialized is like there's no room for that. And I had plenty of friends, and it certainly had nothing to do with them, but it's like the way I was socialized, like, you're just not going to talk about that. Like, there's the initial, like, we're so sorry, all these things, but then, everyone goes back to their life. But if I could have a do-over, and if you have the access to, it's like having the spaces where you can show up and be authentic are invaluable. Of course, for anything, but especially for grief, because two people aren't going to grieve the same way. But whether it's like a support group you can roll up to and you can just say what's been going on, and maybe again someone else could be like, I feel like that some days, whether it's anger, you feel the bargaining, you feel depressed, or some days, which I hear so much guilt around, you feel nothing, or you feel joy and you're like, I had a great day today, and I feel bad because my dad died a month ago. Like, these are the things I hear all the time, and people are asking, like, is that okay? And it's like, when it comes to grief, everything is possible emotionally. But having the support, having the community, and having the space where you could actually talk about it and be authentic. If I could have a do-over, I would have done better at that.
That's how you learn, right? That's the crazy thing about the brain, is the capacity to learn, and neuroplasticity, and our ability to rewire our brains. And unfortunately, like, when we're young, we're never taught how to deal with these big life events. And going back to what you said about men, it's harder for men because men are taught, at least, especially before social media, is that, what is therapy? Men don't cry. You big boys don't cry. You scrape your knee, you get up, you wipe your tears, and you go back and go play. We don't cry. You're a big boy, right? It's literally taught from such a young age. Men are supposed to be providers. They're supposed to take care of their families. You're supposed to not cry and not show emotions. If anything, what is acceptable is masculinity, and masculinity is toughness, it's rage, it's violence to some people, right? So it comes out in all of these other ways. For men that are listening right now and are learning or trying to express themselves in a more healthy way, what's your advice to a man that's listening right now that is like, yeah, emotions don't feel good for me, that feels weak?
Yeah. Yeah, the way that conversation plays out a lot, whether it's with some of my clients or social media, is that it feels like I'm taking something away from them and imposing something that feels completely foreign and uncomfortable. And the taking away is usually like, oh, so, I can't be into sports anymore, or I can't, work out anymore, or I can't do these things. And it's like, but how about a both and? And that's the thing I often run into with all these things, because I'll see a lot of social media posts, and you'll see me in these comments where like, you're dealing with something mental health related, man, you just got to lift more. And it's like, how, dudes, you can have both. You can go to therapy and go to the gym right after. You go to the gym right before, you go to therapy right after, or you could do none of those things. You don't actually have to go to the gym. But again, if I'm meeting men where they're at, which I think has been sort of the fault of mental health, and I feel this way with, again, a lot of other diversity and cultural factors, we often don't meet people where they're at. We say, you need to get all the way over here, and if they're too far away, that's a you problem. But if you're meeting with men where they're at, it's telling them, it's like, you can have some of the ways you cope, especially the ones that aren't harmful, because that's what you've been taught. But what you have to invoke some courage around, and it takes courage, it takes bravery, is that there's a lighter and a less stressful path forward, and certainly a less lonely path forward if you're actually known. And that's the thing I'd challenge all men on. No one knows you, dude. They don't know you. And I've felt that way. I've had those chapters. So I'm saying, from someone who has felt it, they don't know you. They may be some of your best friends. They don't know what's going on with you. They think they know you, but they don't. And there's a much better connecting, less stressful way if you let people in.
What if I say, but okay, but what happens if the women aren't going to like me if I do that? They're not going to be attracted to me because the minute that I show emotions, women find that unattractive. What do you say to that?
Are those emotions your truth? That's the question I look anyone dead in the face, is like, are those authentic emotions who you are? And that's what I would want someone to say to me is like, if that is who you are, you deserve to be with someone who loves, appreciates who you are. If they don't find something that is authentically you attractive, save your time. Move on. It's painful, but no one likes being rejected. No one even likes the, mismatch when you come to arrive of like, oh, we're too separate on this. You want this hyper masculine male who's been put in a box since birth, and I'm being authentic with my emotions, and you think that's unattractive. Sounds like we're not the match. But you can't change them like just as they can't change you. But having a half lived life because you can't have your full emotion, I mean, we got research to show that suppression is going to be bad for you.
I love that. Listen, I'm throwing it out there. I love an emotionally, a couple things I put out there: emotionally available, emotionally vulnerable, and emotionally intelligent. They are separate things,
They
right?
are.
Because there are some people who, like, for example, I'll have a client or even myself, in the past, but if he's so emotionally vulnerable, yeah, but is he emotionally available? Right? He's telling you about his traumas and his past, but is he actually available for like a serious, highly emotionally intelligent relationship that is able to sit with uncomfortable conversations, deal with conflict in a healthy way, and be prepared to listen when you have your needs and not get defensive? Maybe not, but maybe he can tell you about his life story and his traumas. Not
Mm.
the same thing. So I think for some women, just throwing it out there, guys, there are a lot of women who do like a man who is emotionally available, emotionally intelligent, is able to connect with emotions. Now, that's not the same as dealing with emotions in an unhealthy way, like anger or violence or all of these other ways that it can come out. But I love what you said about being true to yourself. And if that person can't recognize it, then maybe the compatibility is just not there. If
Mhm.
you had to name one mental health book or one book that changed your life, what would it be? Putting you on the spot.
Yeah, that's so good. It's almost like I have different like categories in my mind. The first book I read that really impacted me after grief was Tuesdays with Maury. I felt like it was the first book, especially in American culture, that leaned into the experience of death and dying and didn't avoid it. Because I think there's nothing we avoid more in our society than death and dying. We especially, oh God, we can go on and on about that, about all the different industries that benefit off of telling us we're going to live forever.
Oh,
Um,
yeah. And the one thing that we know for sure is that we're all going to die, but yet we avoid even talking about it.
very American thing to do. Like we avoid it, and don't you dare age one bit because that would be awful. Even though that's again, you're going to age, we're going to die, but you're not allowed to do either. That was a really impactful one. Full catastrophe living really offered me another way to live and bridged me into the practice of mindfulness, which then bridged me into understanding and getting interested in Buddhism, which was a huge transition and something that really informed my work as a therapist. It, impacted me deeply spiritually and led to so many different teachings from there. And then I think one other that it's like a classic of classic, but I read it before I started my training was um, The Gift of Therapy by Yalom, a book that just like kind of described what it is like to be a therapist. And there's so many since then. There's been so many written after that, but that was sort of the first intro one that made me appreciate this privileged role that we're put in to be a helper and a guide in this life.
I love those recommendations. I just want to put a feeler out there. I don't know if you have ever done men's retreats. I feel like you would do so well, like doing some type of like men's group, men's retreat, because you just have this, I don't know, it's like your aura when it comes to mental health. And I think that you could be a really great role model, especially for men. And I know you're a dad, right? You have a son, and this like next upbringing of even the next generation. Have you ever thought about doing that?
I, it's weird because it's like I'm one of those people that think about everything, and it's hard for me to make progress on anything. But that honestly, that comment means a lot to me. It really means a lot. So I really appreciate that. Now I'm going to be thinking about it. Now
If
I
you
will.
ever do it, just remember that I said it, just throwing it out there. What are you working on? And where can you find? I'm going to link everything for everyone to find you, but tell us what you're working on and what's coming up for you.
Yeah, I always try to post daily. A modern therapist on Instagram and TikTok. I'm slow build on YouTube. Sometimes I forget about YouTube, but I'll get over there eventually. But I'm bringing back my podcast. I've taken a couple years off. My podcast is Drop In with Dr. J, having all kinds of mental health conversations. So I'm excited. I don't need to convince you. The work is so rewarding. We're in a short form era of content, but long form podcasting is how you have these back and forths. And I miss it greatly. So I'm excited to bring that back.
And it's free for you guys. It's like a free therapy session, but it's not therapy, but it's like a free therapy session,
It's light.
right?
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Oh man. Well, thank you for continuing to do what you do. You're such a great speaker and just so eloquently put with the way that you word things, your storytelling. The work that you do is so important because there is a great mix of relatability, comedy, and important topics that you just have a really great way of blending them all in the same pot, which I think is very rare. There's not a lot of people that can do that. And I think that's where we're going to have the most success when people pay attention. And you have this really great gift of getting people to pay attention. Use that gift and keep doing that because this is your gift. You're very good at it. And it's clearly within the path you're supposed to be on. So thank you for doing what you're doing. And thank you for coming on the show again.
No, thank you so much for your kind words. And thank you for having me again. It really is a privilege.